world. And all of those very important things, they pollinate plants for us. And so that gives us a lot of our fruits and vegetables. And then because a lot of them specialize in what they pollinate, the flowers that depend on them, it's kind of, they're interlocked. So if you lose the bee, you lose the plant because they're not going to produce any seeds anymore. And then we love honeybees, and I love, beekeepers are great. And I actually, you know, keeping bees is a lot of fun, and honeybees are great, but they're almost too smart for their own good. So they're going to find the very best, because you have a colony that can go out there and find the very best sources of nectar and pollen. They're going to avoid a lot of the things out there in nature that may have less pollen or less nectar. And so that'll leave some plants not receiving pollinators. And so that's really why we want to promote our native bees, is because the honeybees are not going to do it on their own. So one of the things we can do is nectar resources. So a lot of people like to plant plants that have flowers that support pollinators. And then what we're going to talk about today is habitat. So where these bees live and what you can do to help keep them up. And I think one of the biggest things right away is is weeds. So a lot of people get rid of weeds, and a weed, that's just a plant growing where it's not wanted. And another way to look at it is a plant whose virtue has not yet been discovered. So really, almost all plants have some virtue. I mean, even if you think about poison ivy, there are birds that eat the seeds, and that's how it spreads. And I know we might not want it in our backyard, so it's a plant growing where it's not wanted. But out there, in the grand scheme of things, it's doing great things. And so here you have this house, and they've got their dandelions growing, and the neighbors are probably really mad. But that is really helping a lot of the native pollinators in their area. And here's another yard, and that's what I wish my yard looked like. Mine is too shady here, I'll show you my yard. Well, I'll show you later, but mine just has a lot of leaves on the ground and not as many flowering plants as you see in this nice open yard. So that's really important for native bees. Is everybody with me so far?
I think so. If Kelly, if you can mute your mic, we keep catching you guys chatting in the background.
Tell her to stop talking.
I've muted you a couple of times, but somebody's clever over there and keeps unmuting you.
Clever is good. All right.
All right.
So today, one of the things we're going to talk about, or the main thing we're talking about, are twig nesters, or cat nests. And so they'll nest in bamboo. They'll nest in old logs with holes drilled in them. And then in nature, they nest in brambles or stems with pithy centers. So like sumac, if you think about blackberries and things like that. And I know those are small, but a lot of these pollinators, they run the gamut from really tiny to carpenter bees. So just about any size in that range will work. Very important, because imagine that without those holes, you have a place to nest. And carpenter bees can make their own holes. We all know that. I think everybody's seen carpenter bees make the holes. The rest of these pollinators and wasps, they need holes that already exist. And in nature, maybe beetles will do it. So maybe a tree falls down or a tree dies, and the beetles will drill into the wood and leave holes, and then the bees and wasps can nest that later. So their habitat is very, I mean, it can disappear. If you don't have branches, if you don't have the plants that these will nest in, they're not going to have homes. So it's really critical that they, so this is one of the things that you all making these bee homes really, really good. And it's also another reason you may, if a tree dies in your yard and it's not going to fall in your house or crush your car, there you can leave it up, and it will actually fill up with all kinds of organisms that so woodpeckers will feed on the animals, beetles will drill holes, bees will move into those holes. So it's connected, and it all helps keep our forests, our planet healthy. So I want to show you some of the twig nesters, and these are x-rays of some blocks of wood. that have been nested in by different bees and wasps. So this first one, do you guys see my cursor moving over it? I just want to make sure. Good. So this first one, this is very closely related to paper wasps. How many people have seen paper wasps? The wasps have the umbrella-shaped nest hanging under eaves. You guys have seen those before? Like those, except it's not social. It's just one female, and she makes her nest, and she has to find a cavity. So here's a hole, and in this case, I drilled that hole in a piece of pine wood. But in nature, it would be a beetle that would go in there and hollow it out. So then this wasp, it goes out and it collects caterpillars. And it's hard for you all to see maybe, but these are tiny caterpillars that this wasp has gone out and collected and brought back to the nest. And in each one of these partitions, you can see she's partitioned it off with some mud, nice dark or those light color partitions. That's where she's put some mud in, and she's filled it with caterpillars, and she's laid an egg in each one of these, and that egg will hatch and feed on those caterpillars. So that's how that one lives. Now, can you imagine what would happen if we didn't have any wasps out there eating caterpillars? So I love caterpillars. I love them. I love to photograph them. I love to get out in nature and see them. But if we didn't have organisms keeping their populations down, a lot of our trees wouldn't have leaves. They'd be completely defoliated and would have a hard time. So here it is. This wasp is doing a key function of keeping our ecosystems healthy. And by the way, all of these can sting, but because they're not social, they don't have big nests that they have to protect with big resources. They fly away, and also they don't have a venom. So these are not bees that can sting you and you have an allergic reaction. Their stingers are really just for laying their eggs and not for defense. So then this one's called a grass wasp. You don't see it with the X-ray, but it actually plugs its nest up with grass, long strands of grass. So if you guys, when you make your nests and you put them out, and this is one that will nest all summer. You can find it all summer, so we're not too late for this for sure. But if your cavity nests out and you see a lot of grass sticking out, this is what you have. And what this one does, she goes out and collects tree crickets. And she brings those tree crickets, she paralyzes them and puts them in the nest, and then lays her eggs. And then she actually will lay multiple eggs, how many crickets she can fit in there. And she plugs it up with grass. And so this is the grass wasp. And once she makes that nest, she does not come back. She puts the crickets, just like this one, she stocks it and closes it up. She doesn't need to come back. So an interesting thing about that, in both of these cases, the caterpillar and the grass, in this case, they've already eaten the tree crickets, so you don't see the tree crickets anymore. These are the grown larvae of the grass wasp. They can't kill the caterpillars or the tree crickets, because if they did that, they would start to rot immediately, and their larvae wouldn't eat them. So they just paralyze them. And I know that sounds really cruel, but they sting them exactly where they can paralyze them, and the insects are the wiser. And the eggs hatch, and they can feed on them without worrying about their larder or their food. Now we get to some nice ones. This is a leafcutter bee, and this is a relative of the leafcutter bee called the potter bee. But again, they're nesting in these wooden cavities, and up here you can kind of see it's plugged with leaf with leaf material. It might be hard to see with the X-ray, but all of that material is leaf, and they even make their partitions with leaf. And what we see in both of these cases, the larvae haven't grown yet, and in fact, they may still be eggs. So that, I think that little dot you see on each one of those are probably the eggs that haven't hatched yet. And same here. And then this light colored ball, that's actually pollen mixed with nectar. And it's like a bread that the bees make, and they lay their larvae on it, lay their eggs on it. And that's what their larvae eat. They eat the pollen and nectar that the mother has collected. And so those are very important bees. And we'll see some, this is the leafcutter bee. You can see evidence of it out in the woods all the time. Then you have, this is another wasp that eats crickets and partitions its cells up with with debris that it finds, little pebbles and things. And then these two are both mud daubers. So everybody's familiar with mud daubers, right? They look like organ pipes. You see them under bridges sometimes, and sometimes under the eaves of your house. Well, these are different species of organ pipe mud dauber that use cavities. But just like the mud dauber, they collect spiders. So they go out in the woods, collect spiders, bring them back, and then their larvae feed on those spiders. So a mud dauber nest is very similar to this, except that the mud dauber makes its own cavity out of mud. And in this case, these mud daubers, they find the cavity, and then they put the partitions and they supply it with spiders and then leave it. So they don't have to waste a lot of time building an extra outer parts to their homes. So that's the benefit they get. But they need to find the holes of the right size. And then this last one, these are carpenter bees. So that's like the biggest hole. That's really the biggest, if you imagine a carpenter bee hole, you're not going to get any, we don't have any bees that are bigger than that in the United States. And so you won't get anything bigger than that nesting. So here's the carpenter bee. These are grown. They've already turned into adults. They're just waiting to emerge. And in this case, the carpenter bees, we think of them as always making their own homes. These found this tube that I drilled, or the female did, and she laid her egg in it and got it started. So they will use these traps and don't have to make new holes. And in fact, if they have holes in your porch or whatever, they usually they'll keep using those and they won't expand them that much. Having said that, they can do damage, so it's just something to be aware of. So the next thing I want to talk about are some of the problems, or a problem, and this is kind of interesting. If you look at this is a carpenter bee nest in a bamboo twig, and the opening is off the screen, off this way. And then this is where the first egg was laid, right? Because she can't lay an egg in here and seal this off and lay eggs in here, right? Does that make sense to everybody? So she has to start here, seal that off, and then do another one, and seal it off, and do another one, collect the pollen and nectar, and then seal it off, and all the way through the tube. And so what you see here, here's one where the egg, either she didn't lay an egg or the egg didn't hatch. And so she's left with some pollen and nectar bread here. But these are all carpenter bees that hatched. They ate all their food. And this one's already becoming an adult. It's pupating. And these are getting ready to pupate. Can you imagine? She starts with this one down here, and then it ends with one that is off our screen. So which one do you think is going to be ready to come out first? Is this one. But what the carpenter bee and all wasps and bees can do this, because they can determine the sex of their offspring. They can determine whether they're male or female. They can actually lay the females first, and they give them more food. The females need more food because they're going to lay eggs. And then they lay males towards the entrance. And the reason they do that is because males do not take as long to develop. So the males down on this end, they're going to develop a lot quicker. Even though these still look like pupa, they're going to end up ready to emerge before she does. That way, the nest opens, these guys escape, and that leaves room for her to escape finally. So now, let me go through some other things real quick. Most of our bees that we see are ground nesters. So if you guys see piles of these are not ant nests. This is like a bee city. And they're very similar. They just live in the ground. So 70% of the bees that we know about actually nest in the ground. And this is a leaf cutter. So this is damage from a leaf cutter bee. You guys have seen plants with the circular holes cut out of them. That's made by a leaf cutter bee that's taken those discs back to its nest. And so these are in the forest. You will see these a lot in the forest. So we think a lot of bees need sunlight, but this one you'll see it in the middle of the forest. And I just want to show you some plants that are really important for our native pollinators. The red maple, the reason I have that in there is it's really one of the first trees that blooms, first flowers that bloom. So this provides nectar early in spring, really actually during winter when a lot of other things aren't out there. So red maple is a good thing to have in your yard because it'll provide nectar and pollen for a lot of early bees. Redbud, which is blooming now, a great tree to have, and carpenter bees and other of the larger bees will come and visit these. Hawthorn and serviceberry, and instead of like Bradford pear, you can use these as well. A lot of these are out right now as well, so bees will come and visit those. And then blueberries. We have a lot of native blueberries that do well, and we have a lot of native species of bees that only visit blueberry. And in fact, they're the best pollinators of blueberries because they tend to do buzz pollination. The only way pollen in these flowers is very sticky, and the only way to get them out is to vibrate at a certain frequency, and the pollen will fall out onto the bee. And honeybees, they'll visit blueberries, but instead of vibrating, they actually will cut a hole in the flower and rob the nectar. They don't actually pollinate the blueberries very well. And then blackberry, not only does it provide nectar and pollen for the bees, but the old stems, when they die, they're going to be able to have nesting habitat for a lot of the bees and wasps that we're talking about. And then tulip tree, tulip poplar, that'll flower later in the spring. And Tupelo is probably an undervalued tree that is great for our area, provides a lot of new flowers, male and female. So both trees are good. The male provides the pollen, the females provide the nectar, but it's a beautiful tree, gets red foliage in the fall. So it's a great one to plant, a great native tree to plant. And then sourwood, beautiful color, and of course it has sourwood honey is famous, especially in the mountains. And then sumac, sumac is, oops, sorry about that. Sumac is, we see that a lot in the forest, and it is a great, it'll flower later on in the spring, but it's a great one. You'll see a lot of bees and flies and things buzzing on it, so it's a great, great pollinator plant. And the stems, they're pithy, and so they get hollowed out, and a lot of the native bees will use them. So I think what I'm going to talk about now is where and how to put the nest that you're going to make up. You'll get more nesters if you put it in a sunny place, and you want to. Let me get back to so you guys can look at me. So you want to put it in a sunny place. Having said that, there are bees and wasps all over, even in dark forests, and so you can put them there as well. But it's just the likelihood of you finding of nesters moving into them may be less. But definitely, if you have a sunny spot in your yard or your garden, that's a great place. A lot of people say that if they're facing south, it's a little bit better. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I have read that. So if you can find, and the reason they say that is because the south part of the sky, that's where we receive most of our sunshine in this hemisphere. All of our sunshine, it comes from the south. So if you kind of point them south, number one, the holes are easier for the bees to see and orient to. And so that's probably the main reason for that. You want them about 3 to 4 feet off the ground. If they're really close to the ground, ants and other things, parasites can move into them. So you want to make sure kind of they're off the ground. And you can do that. You can have a stump. You can hang them. We did find it seems like hanging them so they're moving and swinging in the wind is not as good. But if you put them on a post, and fix them to something, they'll be fine. And you did mention this already. You want the holes not where it rains in on them. So you want them kind of parallel to the ground, or maybe even a little bit pointed down, so that rain won't go into them. And I think that's all the advice I have, unless you guys have questions.